As we continue with our series on Black History Month here on South Bay Sunday, Jan Batiste Atkins has rejoined us, the author of African Americans in San Francisco, and also the author of a pretty cool website. Nice to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about your website.
My website was designed so that I could post interesting things about the African American pioneers and African American leadership, so that people could go to the website and find out more about these individuals. It's my plan to continue updating it all the time and putting new faces on the website as I discover new people doing new things. So I'm currently now in the process of writing a book about African Americans of Monterey County, and so I hope to put I have a lot of additional information from Santa Cruz, Monterey, down in those communities, Salinas, and I'd like to be able to add some of those heroes to the website. So soon you will see additional faces, additional African American historical figures, as well as current people who have made a major contribution in their communities.
That's a rich history. I imagine you're having fun doing that.
Oh, I love it. It is such a it's just a joy. I'm having so much fun meeting such wonderful people, meeting people who really care about the history of the communities, and and each community is different, and each community has its own major characteristics, and African Americans played different roles in different communities, and so it's wonderful to be able to interview individual families as well as leaders, as well as government officials.
If you don't pay attention, it's surprising how far back the history goes in places like Monterey and Carmel. Carmel, with 200 years, really, and, of course, San Jose, 200 years, too, and San Francisco, originally Yerba Buena. Yes. The book, how's it doing?
It's doing really well. Actually, as you know, the San Francisco book is currently being used in the schools, both in San Francisco and in San Jose.
The Images of America series.
The Image of America series, yes. And so the books are available to school-age children so that they're able to have access to this rich information and also able to research further. They can identify various historic leaders, and then they're able to then research those leaders in using other medias to find out more about them.
Yeah, it's wonderful you have that book. As a student, I can recall, what an eye-opener it was when people pointed out people like George Washington Carver. As a kid, your education is limited to what they teach you in the classroom, and unfortunately, for a good long time, they didn't teach you that in the classroom.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of Black History Month. I know that many believe that we ought to teach ethnic history throughout the entire year, but having a month for various ethnic groups and cultural groups is a great time for libraries to kind of showcase their resources for kids and adults also interested in learning more about a particular cultural group. And so Black History Month does allow the community to better become very much acquainted with the various resources available in the community for academic study.
As a historian, is it a busy month for you?
It is a busy month because many organizations like to have historians and others out to talk about various historical periods, and so I've been receiving many invitations to talk about Black history.
As I said, it's sort of an eye-opener for, say, a white kid in a school growing up in the Santa Clara Valley to learn so many contributions from blacks. For you, it must be an eye-opener that you have to do it, that you have to tell people something that perhaps should have been known.
It is an eye-opener, but at the same time, I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's a privilege, actually, because the kind of research I do, I not only research famous people, but I also research the people who we know very little about, but the people who are at the forefront of change in their communities. And so I believe it's just an absolute privilege. And then it's a great joy to be able to make this information available to the public. And I think the Image of America series is such a wonderful series because it focuses on local history. So not only are we identifying the leadership that are well known, but we also get a chance to identify the leadership that people know very little about, but who've really made a major contribution and difference in their communities. And so I absolutely love the series. And so for you as a little boy, if you had to,
if only,
right? But now your children will have access to this information.
They sure do. So. African Americans of San Francisco is the name of the book. I know it's available also on Amazon because I've checked. You can pick it up there. It's a great read. And and it's an eye-opener for the city of San Francisco. I would say San Francisco being what we would call a diverse city, it might have been a more open city for change and for ethnic diversity and for those of color to contribute. Would you say so?
Historically, probably so. And the reason for that is because it's one of the oldest cities on the West Coast. And it was one of the cities that attracted African Americans back in the 1800s. So many went to San Francisco simply to establish a new home, to start new communities. Whereas, and so being a city, and a city right on the bay, it also, there are many, many employment opportunities during those years. Whereas other communities were slowly developing as a result of San Francisco's development. So yes, it is one of the oldest cities, yet one of the richest cities in terms of opportunities and in terms of history.
Looking toward the future, my son, who lives in San Francisco, is one of those kids who's hooked on statistics.
Oh.
And he looks at the movement of various ethnic groups, and he sees black people moving out of San Francisco. Part of the reason is, I imagine, job opportunity, but one of the biggest reasons is it's so darn expensive to live there.
Right. It's really most unfortunate. But the African American population has began declining in the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
And it happened as a result of redevelopment. So many people were displaced and were not able to find affordable housing in the city. So many had to leave the city, move to the East Bay, move to the South Bay, and we continue to see this decline ever since that time. Now we have a gentrification which has affected many cities throughout America. The only unfortunate part about gentrification is that the housing stock now has become much less affordable, much more expensive, and so many families of various ethnic groups have had to leave the city to find housing elsewhere, and it has seriously impacted the African American population. The African American population at 2000 had dropped as low, not at 2000, 1990s, had dropped as low as 56,000. So it went from almost 100,000 to 56,000, and today it's much less.
In San Francisco?
In San Francisco, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the people who changed San Francisco. The Honorable Ladoris Cordell, the judge, was our guest recently, and she talked about the people who changed California historically in the 1800s and in the early 1900s specifically. And most of those changes came through legislation, lawsuits, people who became, elected officials. Those people made big changes. Who else made big changes?
Well, San Francisco's change started from the 1850s, 1860s, and you're talking about people who came together as a community to free a black man who was tried under the fugitive slave law, Archie Lee. And so from that day on, that's when civil rights and justice was a major focus of the leadership of San Francisco. And after that, there were other African Americans that were brought in as slaves. Black people brought in as slaves, and gaining freedom was so important. San Francisco established group homes where people could go and they could find out different ways to find their freedom. And then from then into the 20th century, we have the labor movement. Many African Americans came during World War II to work in the shipyards and found employment opportunities. But when the war was over, these people were displaced, had no place to go. And jobs the industry practiced discrimination in terms of employment. Mm-hmm. And so what happened is that many African Americans were displaced. And so finding jobs and working in the area of civil rights to make sure that employment opportunities were available was a major focus. So justice and civil rights was so essential. And then, of course, we have the student rights movement, which was a very important movement to the community of San Francisco, because not only did it focus on providing African American studies and other study groups for other ethnic groups, but it also promoted community-based education too, so that people in the community would have access to this knowledge about their particular ethnic group. So we see this continual from the very beginning. from when California became a state. We see this continual drive to achieve justice for African Americans and other ethnic groups too throughout the state.
Yeah, and I can remember as recently, the 80s, but also the 60s. There were big demonstrations in San Francisco for equality, especially hiring and education equality. It's interesting hearing you tell this. I'm wondering, as a historian, what we're talking about is history, but what we're experiencing is history. It's always moving.
Yes.
It's always moving forward.
Right.
So it must be a special thing for you when you look at one person and you say, wow, we're this way because that person did that.
Right. I find myself looking at the contributions of those individuals and trying to understand the impact, the broad impact that individual has made upon a total community and upon a city. Mm-hmm. And that's really significant. And today, of course, in San Francisco, we see this. I think people like Willie Brown, I think Kamala Harris, I think she is such a rising star.
Yeah.
And I think in time to come, we don't understand the impact that these people have made upon their communities, but we will in time. As historians, we look back and get a better understanding of what has happened. And there are many others. There are people who have been elected to positions of local government, and we're not even aware of these people yet. But their time will come, and we will see their impact in their communities also.
Willie Brown, what a dynamo! What an unusual, fascinating person he is. And look at the changes he made in San Francisco.
Right.
Is he one of the stars of your book?
Yeah, I do mention Willie Brown in my book. There's a couple of photographs of Willie Brown when he worked with the students in the student right movement, when he worked with the community in the redevelopment efforts to try to achieve justice for families that were displaced. And then, of course, I do mention his contribution as an assembly in the California State Assembly as a speaker, and then, of course, as the mayor. But like I said, there are many. He's very significant, but there are many others too.
I know you have personal reasons for writing a book like this, but you've written this book so that we can read it and so that we can gain from it. And as you said at the beginning of our conversation, so students can learn from it. Is that the most important thing to you? The effect it has on people, maybe the enlightening effect on people who may be unaware of contributions made by black people in American history?
Well, I think it's very important for American history to tell the complete story, to tell everyone's story, to write about the contributions of all groups of people that have come together to create and to form this community. And I think the most important, as an educator, the most important audience are students. I think that young kids today must have access to the truth and to true history and to the resources that we provide them through our books. And so I really believe that in order to reach students, we must be able to put this book in the hands of families so that parents then will have access to this information. And as students begin to develop their curiosity about a topic or about people, about their local history, they're able to have resources available to them. And I like the Images of America format because not only are information included about the actual major contributions, but we also have information about the individuals along with photographs. And I think the photographs, that's simply a major contribution.
That must have been a fun part of your job.
Oh, finding the photographs, that's probably the most it's difficult. At the same time, it's most enjoyable because I find myself sorting through many, many photographs, trying to find one that really conveys a particular story or an issue that I think is important. And so it's trying to find the right photograph, the right expressions, the right background. That's the fun part. And I just hope that the photographs that I've selected for this book are photographs that truly tell the story of the African American community in San Francisco. And as with my Monterey book, I hope that book will be finished this summer and available in 2015. And so I really hope that the photographs will tell the story.
Every picture tells a story. What's your favorite story from African Americans of San Francisco?
Well, my favorite story happens to be the story of Mary Pleasant and Charlotte Brown. And the reason this story is so important to me is because Charlotte Brown was a woman who actually, she's like the very first Rosa Parks, before Rosa Parks. But she was the first woman. And there were probably many, many women that were told to get off the bus.
Right.
But she was told to get off the trolley back in the 1800s, around 1860. And she had been writing this transportation for a long time, and she was told to give up her seat to a white woman and to get off because there were no other seats. And she didn't want to get up, but she did. She had to get off the train, and then she sued. She sued. And this was not really a train. This is, I have to remind you, it's a horse-drawn buggy.
Right. Yeah.
And so she sued the company, and she won her case. She won $500, which was a lot of money in that time.
Uh-huh.
And so, but she wasn't very happy because it only applied to her. She was the one that benefited. And the reason for that is because the courts ruled, well, she had always been allowed to ride, and here all of a sudden she now is denied, and so that's not fair. And so, of course, they sided with her, but also said that it only applied to her. Well, then a few years later, Mary Pleasant, then she had enough money to hire a lawyer, and she was able then to sue the omnibus company in San Francisco. And as a result of her suit, then African Americans, this was after the Civil War by this time, so African Americans were given then access to the local transportation system.
And this was
it was a law. It was just amazing. And so to me, and she's been designated as the mother of civil rights. And I think her story is an exciting story because she was a woman who came here her husband died en route to California. And so she came to San Francisco by herself, and she established a boarding house for girls. And she contributed to the community in a very major way before the Civil War and after the Civil War. So her plight did not end. She died in the early 1900s, but her legacy is that she continued to fight for justice and civil rights for all people, and also provided homes for single women in San Francisco.
Well, thank you for providing her story and all the other great stories in African Americans of San Francisco.
Thank you very much.
Great to talk to you. Let's talk again when Monterey comes out.
Okay, great.